Okay, so from a quick introduction, my name is Kishan Ramaswamy. I'm a product manager for the Enterprise NFV solution. And here, I mean, we've just to recap what we've heard for the last an hour and a half. So we had Liado James gave us an introduction of all the solution. We had James go into the 4 different layers of that architecture. The hardware layer, we went over NFVIS, he gave us a wonderful demo on that. And we talked about the VNFs, and then we also talked about the orchestration layer. So right now, to close this session, I wanted to get into that orchestration layer that we've seen through, and I'm going to walk you through multiple steps. Now, the first thing that you do when you log into ESA is you'll get this landing page, right? This is your orchestrator, this is your UI. You're going to go here, and first thing you're going to see is, okay, what are the number of devices that are there? What's the status of the device? How many branches you have? Are there any in error state? You get a quick view of the network. The first thing we want to do is, let's go and start, create a new profile. So this is me coming in using the ESA tool and creating creating a template of what I want to see deployed at a branch, right? So let's go and create a new profile. And there are 2 ways you can do it. The first way is what's called a prescriptive way. So with the prescriptive way, we've taken all our years of experience of testing the solutions out, taking our validated designs, and we've kind of imported a lot of that into ESA. So for the end customer, what they would do is they would come in here and answer questions. For example, they can say, do you want a physical router or a virtual router? And I can say, I want a virtual one. I want a single WAN connectivity. Security is important. And so also I'm going to say, well, I want direct internet access. Maybe I want to offload some of my guest traffic directly to the internet. So you can click on that. Go next. Security, I mean, we've heard of so many different issues with different retailers regarding securing their different locations. So let's say I want to go deploy a secure, virtual ASA or something of that sort. So we can go and say I want to deploy a secure branch. So as you go down this path, on the far right, you'll see matching templates. Yes, I haven't answered all the questions, but these templates will start to change color. And the one closest to what you're trying to deploy will then pop up on the right. So you can select that and go through your deployment. But let's say I want to go in and give you another option, which is the customizable option. What it really means is I'm going to give you a whiteboard, and within this whiteboard, you draw what you want to see deployed. On the left-hand side is a panel. You have a bunch of things. You have a hosting platforms. We've talked about the different options that we have. You have the UCS server. You have the ISR 4K with UCS E-Series as an example. But in my example, I'm just going to go and drop in a UCS server. You'll notice that there are a few, for ease of deployment, we're representing a few networks over here. There's a WAN network, there's a LAN network, there's an inter-VM communication network called the service network, there's a management network. So we've predefined this and we've kept it over here. But next is those actual functions that you want to see deployed. So on our left, again, we have a choice. You have a virtual router. Let's say I want to go and deploy a virtual router. I want to certainly deploy a firewall, not a VM that I want to deploy. I want to go and deploy WAN acceleration. And let's say I want to also deploy a wireless LAN controller for my branch. Next thing you want to do is, okay, for my router, I certainly want that connected to my WAN network. Firewall, I want to connect it to my LAN. And you can start drawing this out. Right? And you want to connect your WAN acceleration, you want that communicating between your router. So as you keep drawing this out, I want you to look at the far right. You'll see templates again getting matched. And this has got a closer match, the one in green. Let's go and view that. So now you can see, you can validate this, you can have a look at it and say, well, this is kind of what I want to do. I have my router that's connected to my WAN network. I have my firewall to my LAN. I've got communication going between my router and my firewall, as well as between my router and WAN acceleration. So this is kind of what I want to deploy. So I can go ahead and say use template. Let's give it a name. Let's say. So let's give it a name. And then here you can go in and customize this template. So for example, on the UCS server, we can go in and say what type of day zero config you want to attach to it. So when this platform boots up and comes up, we can exactly know what to configure for that platform. You can select a group. I mean, this is up to you. You can go create groups in your entire network. just for ease of management. So I'm going to pick something that says West Coast. Come into the ISR, the virtual router, and similarly for the ISR, you can go in and say what type of configuration you want uploaded over here. What type of day zero config do you want? Right? You can come to virtual VARs, and let's say in the virtual VARs, I want a bigger footprint. I've got more sessions that I want handled by that VNF. So I can go and say, well, I want to increase the CPU count. I just have to drag and slide that over. For firewall, again, similar things. You go through that process. But the nice thing about firewall, and again, all the other VNFs is, and like James brought up and brought up earlier, we're not restricting ourselves to Cisco VNFs. Right? You can definitely do third-party VNFs as well. So we give you that option in the drop-down. You can go and select whether it's a third-party firewall or a Cisco firewall. Let's say we do Cisco firewall here. And lastly, even we go into the last VNF, which is the wireless LAN controller, validate everything, make sure you provide the location where the VNFs are. And this is where, when it communicates, when this profile is transmitted to NFVI sitting on the branch, it knows where to go and fetch this VNF. It's going to go fetch that VNF and then start bringing it up on the local machine. So once you're done with that, you click on Save and Submit for approval. It's a two-step process. Yes?
For the third-party plugins, if you will, or VNFs, you would have to rely on the third-party configurator for that VNF, correct? Is there a plugin for that, or how does that work in terms of workflow?
Sure. So again, I think we just went past that screen. Even for the third-party VNF, there is a day zero configuration that you can upload and attach it into this profile.
Okay.
So that gives you the initial connectivity to that VNF. And it's possible that third-party VNF has their own management tools, but now that you have brought it up with the day zero config, you can then directly connect to it and then.
You can pass that device pretty much any number of parameters you want to turn it up. As simple as just basic connectivity and then maybe an address so it can reach its element manager or a fully loaded operational config.
And it's the same for Cisco VNFs, third-party VNFs.
Yeah,
identical. It's basically the same approach or same model that for config drive works with OpenStack.
A lot of VNFs have kind of the equivalent of you can attach a drive to it that has a configuration file, and we've templatized it. So if with that language, you can say when ESA pushes that config file out, you can replace variables with IP address or license token, etc. So VNFs that have that ability can use the automation that we've built in, and we have a language to connect the two together.
So I assume you've already worked with like F5 and
we're working with a number of vendors.
As a for instance.
I can tell you, for instance, we've worked with at least 4 now that we've done basic testing with, outside of Cisco in those around security, application processing. So,
right.
And it varies as far as level of support for bootstrapping, but everybody seems to be open or at least going in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
Good news is it's the infrastructure that we test. So that's the best way you can scale to the number of VNFs that are out there. So we've been, like everybody said here, we've been testing with all these third-party VNFs, and our focus of our testing is around the infrastructure. Can I get your ESA to pick that VNF and deploy it on a remote location running an FEIS and attached configuration? So that's the robustness that we've created over here.
But, we could pretty much deploy anything, right? Is that kind of the way I'm grasping this and popping in the template? Kind of like the Terry's point, like if you were to take kind of load balancing, like an Nginx type of deployment, could you deploy that across all your sites and throw that in a template?
Yes, you can. That's cool. Yeah, to say how far you sort of want to go with that, we'll fully expect to have somebody take, for example, like an Ubuntu image, and where they build their own application onto it, and maybe they do a redirect through like IP tables to pump something out to something that they want to run their own stored IPS or something. That they can go in there, take that in there, as long as they build that QCOW image, they put in the 2 metadata files, tar it up in an archive file, and it loads. And actually, we've done a lot of testing of that.
This is
Is it going to move to the direction of doing more like native container support as opposed to wrapping?
You're talking about like Linux, like LXC or Docker kind of container?
Yeah, Docker.
So the first release as we go out of this will be KVM based onto it. We've got a couple different options we began to look at as far as in supporting other containers, whether it's in protected space in NFVIS, or whether there would simply be a dedicated VM instance that would then just run those container applications.
Why would you run it in protected space as opposed to just a separate VM?
Right.
You already have the infrastructure.
Sorry?
Why would you run a protected space as opposed to just the dedicated VM for?
Because there's some customers that simply ask the question is, can you run this just under the garnish of the CPU resource that you're running in there? It's not that it's something we're planning to do. It's simply this comes up as we have dialogues and conversations, and therefore it's something you always have to consider.
Fair.
But let's just say that, yes, that is definitely part of our plans to support that infrastructure. Like James says, not right now, but something in the short term, and we'll do it. Okay. Just one more last thing on that third-party thing. I want to tie this conversation back to what James mentioned, and it's about the interface spec document. So a lot of the stuff is going to be published online where vendors can basically download that document, understand how to package their VNF, just get the day zero config, get the property files, tar it with their QCOW image, and then it just works in this environment. So we kind of keep it mixed. That's simple. Anyway, let's just keep moving on to the rest of the demo. So now what I did was I created a particular template. You saw that. I went in, I gave it some parameters, and we're good. But now let's go and take the next step of actually deploying this template that I just created, TFD demo, onto a particular branch. So now, I previously uploaded the list of all branches that are there in my network. And so that's why when I go to the branch view, you get a global view of all the different branches. To explain the color code, the ones that are green are locations where there's been a profile already deployed. The one that's in yellowish color or orangish color is the one that's in progress. So there's been transaction happening there. You don't really see it right now, but then there are some locations that will be, when they're in blue, it just means that that particular location hasn't been provisioned yet, and we're going to get one location and provision it. So you can zoom in, or you can basically search over here for locations. Let's pick that location. So we have a location right here that's blue, it's not provisioned, and let's go ahead and take that template that we just created and provision this particular site. Right? All I have to do is go click here on provision branch. There's a whole bunch of templates that will show up. We can search for the one, wait, that was not the one. Yeah. Click on that one and say next. Verify all that information is right. Going next. And here, and if you remember, you've seen the picture where James brought up the integration between Prime, APIC controller, and ESA running on top. So here's where you do that mapping. Here's where you tell ESA, so this particular profile uses this set of APIC EM and Prime controllers. It's so possible that your organization is quite large, that you have multiple controllers. So if that's the case, using the drop-down, you can kind of pick which one it is and map this profile to that. Once you've done the mapping, you go next. And here's a location where you would come in and provide site-specific parameters. Remember, I'm provisioning from a global template. I'm taking that and provisioning this particular site. So I can either upload an Excel file, or I can do it manually. So one of the first things is let's go to ISRV first, right? It's possible that this particular site uses a different login and username and password. So I could come in here and then enter that information. I can even download the template that we have for the day zero config, take this, modify it for that particular site, and upload it back in. And once I do that, all the site-specific parameters are available for this particular profile.
But you do have a way that I can build that in a CSV or something and load it in.
Absolutely.
Cool.
This is just a next level of customization if you really need it.
So are the templates like OpenConfig, Yang models, or what are you guys using to actually?
Sorry.
For the templates, are they like OpenConfig, Yang model, or what are you guys actually using for that side?
I'm sorry, you mean for the templates for which, for like the
config file?
With
Not for
Bootstrap?
the config file, for the actual description of your map to branch, right? You have this as it was listed as TFD demo 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's your template. Is that described as like OpenConfig? Is it a Yang configuration?
I don't think it's not a Yang configuration. I think it's just XML data. It's a simple structure to define like 4 or 5 attributes for each point in the template. Checking actually, I never really thought about it.
Well, I mean, it seems to make sense that if you're going to be able to do this sort of universally across the board for third party, that using OpenConfig makes a heck of a lot more sense because you can describe your BGP environment that you want to have operationally running, and you'll be able to import an OpenConfig with a well-described Yang model and then be able to apply and push that for a template. So there's a natural progression for being able to utilize something like that to end up in the end state that you want. I don't care what, it doesn't need to be, I don't care whether you guys are using XML behind the scenes for whatever you want to do for your own template configurations, but being able to have model sets that are pre-provisioned and provided by the community overall as open standards. I mean, Google's working on this heavily, and there's a lot of others.
Yes, so I think there's two parts. This template is the template for the topology of the network.
Yeah.
But it isn't the template for the configuration of the VNF. So what you're saying definitely applies for us to look at the VNF configs.
Okay.
But surely you can kind of meta it out to the topology as well. But this is really more templates for describing
Just
the
the
VNF
topology portion.
and the interconnectivity. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause anything where you're doing service instantiation config that gets put down to the VNF for that service is just a block of data to the orchestrator. It just passes whatever it is. So here, regardless of the format of that data, it wouldn't matter. So if somebody generated that by a Yang model or open config, it would simply get imported part of that day zero config file and off it went.
But I like your idea of open config. You go take a look at that and say, can we use that for even the VNF
Right.
provisioning? We'll look at that. That's a good idea.
Keep moving on. The other thing that I want to talk about is when you go into the site, let's say if you have all these different multiple UCS servers, for example, shipped to that site. How do you map this particular profile to that particular UCS server that's shipped out? And it's through this serial number mapping right here. So you would come to this particular profile and say, well, I have this particular serial number of this device. I want to map this profile to that one. So when the PNP workflow is executed and when the device reaches out to the PNP server, it's going to get a serial number. It's this serial number that will go out. And that's when it will validate and say, okay, we have a profile for this particular device, and the rest of the workflow will be executed. So that's where we do the mapping for the serial number. Similarly, if there's anything you want, you can do. Now, there is a subgroup selection. So I broadly classify this as some, in the Midwest, but within Midwest, if there's certain other, zones that you might have created in your template, you can select that here as well, just for an ease of management perspective.
Like test lab.
And then finally, you go in and verify that on, we'll see. Same configuration applies for ASA as well. If there's anything site-specific, you enter it here, and then you click Next. And this is where you can decide whether you want to provision the branch now or maybe at a later time. So you can either do that now or select later. Let's do it now, and click Provision. So now what's happening is we have kickstarted the whole process of provisioning this template that we created down to that site. So the orchestrator will now, first thing is the PNP workflow will be executed. The PNP workflow will be executed where the serial number will go back to that particular profile. It'll get matched against it. And then APKM will then send that over to ESA and say, well, I have this device that's come in. I have this serial number. I assume that there is a matching template for it. ESA will then talk to PI that James drew, and PI will start the execution of this workflow. But before it starts to provision everything, before the NFVIS gets involved in bringing up the VNFs, the first thing, and this is the long discussion we had a while back, it's going to check for resources. This is where it'll start and say, well, you created this profile. When you created this profile, the platform might not have even been there on that site. So we would now do a check against what you've created, whether that can be fit into that particular platform. Once you do that matching, the next steps will kick in. So let's go back and look at that particular branch. Let's go select, search for the one that's under provisioning, click us. So right now, it's just started the initial communication, right? All the different default networks that were created, the WAN, LAN, management, service networks, all that are being spun up on the remote site. So once the resource check has been passed, the next step is to do that. You can even, view the progress of all the different steps that are involved. So we'll come back to this midway. Let's go look at a site that's already provisioned, and I'll come back here and show you this so you can see the sequence of steps that's happened. Let's pick one that's provisioned already. Yeah, let's pick one right there. So at the end of this, what will happen is this is what your end state will look like. It's a complete zero-touch deployment. You'll have all the different VNFs spun up on the remote site, IP addresses spun up, provided to them, day zero config attached, and then the orchestration will acknowledge back saying that the remote site is completely done. That's the end-to-end flow. And you do this across a global number of sites. So this is your central orchestrator. create your profile once, of course, you have the option to keep on modifying those templates, and then you keep pushing it out. Anything else that, guys, I might have missed in this that you want to add? Do you guys think? So-so, lukewarm?
I think after the Docker question, there was, although when we said as far as what you can or can't do today on that, one of the references that was specifically with regards to direct orchestration control. If someone were to build, an Ubuntu or a Linux VM and put a web application that ran a Docker container on that and built it into our package and spun it off, there's actually no reason that would actually work. I mean, we wouldn't have any ability right now, but that's something as far as to be worked on, is to do something through provisioning to actually alter or configure that. But an individual user creating their own application and building that and uploading it in our system, that actually should all work.
That will work.
Yeah. So I mean, at that level of support, I mean, that's
Yeah, that's not. So that's not particularly useful from the aspect that what you want is you want something like Docker Swarm integration or Docker Cloud integration.
Absolutely, yeah, that's.
I mean, a single instance that that might be useful for a one-off or something you want to run, but the reality is that far more interested in what capabilities for something like an extension with Docker Swarm or Docker Cloud, or Mesos or Kubernetes or any schedulers to perform resource integration hooks with what you guys already have, so that when they choose to deploy resources, that fits within that pool, and the scheduler goes out and lays that stuff down.
Right. Yeah. If you have everything exposed and you use like Kubernetes etcd or whatever out there, and you have all these sites and you want to deploy, let's say, applications directly at the site in a container, it would just be, it'd be beautiful. But I said, if you could deploy a container like at sites, right, to move the application closer to the site, like via through Kubernetes or etcd or whatever you're using there, I mean, that would be very attractive for most large enterprises.
And that's a large part of the direction, right? For after we get through the first piece, which is the core platform software infrastructure piece to be done, the amount of virtual services that are the most desirable at the current moment, which are largely those that took appliances and created virtual instance appliances out of those, and that's where they get spun up second. And then we start to add the other types of container application services going forward.
Are you guys in discussions with like CoreOS or anyone else doing more secure implementations of Stack? Because obviously that's a big exposed footprint for you guys in terms of what's running on that particular platform.
Yeah, so I mean, from security perspective, we are doing several different things. So within Cisco, we have different different processes within Cisco to build secure platforms. So we are following all that so that when we ship this platform, it will be secure, right? So.
And then I'll ask the horrid question. So let's talk about VMware and NSX. In terms of, is it an API hook that you guys are planning on doing to do pass-through for service insertions? So if you have VMware running in the far edge side and you have NSX and you want to be able to stitch that together, are you expecting this to the low-level interface to be OVS, or what's the play in terms of someone?
So first of all, as probably you heard throughout the presentation today, every piece of the solution has open APIs which can be used. I think as a Cisco solution, you've seen we have all components, and we think the value that we bring with our solution is a lot of this networking, design, and implementation, which is a little bit different than other solutions in the market. If our customers, I think they're open to do that, and we will work with them if that's required. But at the moment, we're making the infrastructure open with hearing our customers and our partners, and then we'll react based on these requirements.
Is the architecture going to be any different for folks that decide to adopt Hyperflex instead and look in that direction as opposed to UCS, because obviously that's built VMware specific, and is there a different design philosophy that's going to go in, or is it just going to be we will lay this down on top in the same way, or the longer term roadmap in terms of what you guys are thinking?
Yeah, so again, Hyperflex and the ability to run maybe at the branch an extension of the data center probably makes more sense. I think this is where an organization will need to decide what's the right architecture. Again, extending what I have in the data center to the branches with the same tools and capabilities, or have some branches with design methods that need to integrate with what I have back in the data center. I think these are
But large enough
open
organizations
questions.
are going to do both, right?
Yes.
And So,
Yes.
so then it becomes a nightmare on them to stitch the API and control portions together, right? To make that happen.
It becomes even more of a complex matter when you look at the organizational design, because a lot of those cases, when we start to now begin to cross some of these boundaries, is that these are have largely been organizationally different groups in the company. Like people who run security systems, who do networking components, that do data center switching. Those people that are the server admins or application sides are generally, and the larger the company you go, the more it is, have been siloed. It's almost a similar scenario when back 10, 15 years ago when Cisco first went into the voice area, right? And basically what you find was you had this wonderful technology, everything you were going out with. The only problem is that to run voice over the network, it now impeded on a different area called telecom, right? So in addition to just the system side of it, we also need to work with how that now fits
Sure,
organizationally.
I don't disagree with that, but my point being is that just by exposing raw APIs to all the different teams isn't necessarily solving the problem, right?
Yes, so a couple of different things, right? So I think there's kind of stitching a secure network fabric, which I think we will do between the WAN and the kind of campus network and the data center. So that we will have as we go forward. And you will see that in terms of the ISRV being that connection point, because it does things like SGT or IPsec or GRE. So you'll see the connectivity, the secure access on the LAN side, and that ties back to the same kind of access on the campus access, right? So I think you'll see consistency in terms of policy and how it gets applied. But I don't think we just automatically match all the tools used on the data center to the branch, because I mean, people try doing OpenStack in the branch, is horrible, right? I mean, it just doesn't work. So I think that's why we've said, hey, this is really oriented towards lower speed links, WANs. I mean, we think we'll see more people staging some of the images on the server, so pushing everything down a WAN link. So I do think the tools will be slightly different. They just can't take a data center tool and match it directly to
There'll be some points. I mean,
I don't disagree, but the problem is that you're going to have teams that are doing, most likely in large scenarios, you're going to have multiple distributed data centers, some probably more prime than others, and others that are backups or secondaries or whatever, and then remote distributed branch configurations. So now in standard data center deployment, right, if I choose to do 9K with ACI, I've got one policy framework that I've got to work with, one set of NFV service instructions that I've got to work with, and I probably have the same team doing a push for remote sites for same sort of service insertions and NFV functions that they want to run even at the branch. I now need to write two different policy controls in two different language sets with two different API models to get the same end result, right? And that's one of the frustrations. I mean, I realize Dave Ward's trying to stitch stuff together, but
I think the stitching, there are some elements. There's the controllers, both APIC and APIC-EM, and we definitely are looking on to see how some of the policies can go across using the controller layer and then distributed into the network. The other thing that we are looking and working on.
And it's I know you guys are running fast, but at the same time, sometimes you have to slow down and figure out how to make life easier for your end customer as opposed to solving just one particular point set of problems right now.
Yeah, and as we've been moving, we've had a very iterative process as we've gone through the cycles for the last 9 months since we started the whole project, where we've had iteratively with several customer advisory teams, and we received some piece of an input on separate overlay team from the Cisco sales side that then went and engaged with other customers beyond those that were just on the direct advisory team. And so we've been doing that kind of iterative incorporation of feedback back in. But I mean, there's always conversation around creating some commonality between orchestration tools between the different environments. I mean, that has come up.
Let's just go back and close it. I think we're almost done it.
We're done actually.
Right now.
So we're just in that conversation. See how everything happened. You probably missed it. But,
That's how it's supposed to be.
So as you can see, the different stages, right? So we were at this stage, we said creating the network, internal networking, and all the bridges that are required for it. Then we came up and spun up ISRV and attached the configuration for it, and then we went ahead and deployed it. Again, remember, all this is back and forth. It's talking to this NFVIS. It went to that location where you specified, pick that image, download it, and it went through the process for every one of them. If you want to go look at any of the detailed process, you have the entire set of logs that it provides, so you can go in and look at what's happened, if you want to troubleshoot that. Okay? So that's the end-to-end workflow. So you start from here and you get up a site. up and running. Yes, please.
So have you spent much time working with customers to do DevOps sort of workflows with this, and what's the response been if you have?
Say specifically DevOps, I'm just trying to understand, so the exact...
DevOps as referred to when an organization pushes out new software incrementally. Okay, so I can see doing the same thing, much like you had mentioned earlier, James had mentioned earlier, when you said we could take the network and we could insert a new function, NFV function in, okay, so there's a DevOps for networking play there, okay, so I'm modifying how the network looks at hundreds of branches, and I want to do that tonight.
Sure.
I think it's definitely a use case. I think the reality is probably the answer is not yet.
Okay.
If you look on the current state of the market, enterprises are in early stages of enterprise NFV.
I understand, but there are some early adopters. I was just wondering.
Yes.
if
Yeah,
you
here's
started
the
with
one-
these.
We are working with several
Yeah.
architects. A lot of these concepts are there.
Yeah, the one customer that was probably actually not that long ago had a discussion around that, actually wanted to look at a type of model where they thought they could sandbox the topology that they want to be able to do, to run that through the test scenarios. They say that, okay, I want to go in and change inspection policy, and I'm going to insert my new point of sale transaction piece. I want to be able to do that, have that model be in, and then query across and say what number of sites follow that model, and then just have it push.
Right.
And only after it does a pass, and then do an act for each time it goes on. That's probably the closest one we've had where there's been that kind of discussion. I mean, honestly, largely if we've had conversation with customers onto this, because of the newness out of it, it's
It requires your head to change.
well, there's a certain amount of leap, right, as far as you walk in. But the other side too is because one of the things that we really did try to do with the solution as we build forward is because you realize that a lot of at least half to 3/4 of the time, the primary audience are going to be networking teams. And so the idea was to really bury the notion of virtualization underneath the implementation, so that on the face value, basically what you were doing was creating network capabilities, functions, and services, right? As opposed to saying, you're now going to become a virtualization and DevOps and programming guy, because it's too intimidating at first to be able to have that. So the best thing is to say it's not that ugly, actually. It just first thing first, and then you go on. That's probably why I think it's only been until very recently where even the first kind of DevOps conversation came about.
Okay.
So I have a quick question. If you have an interrupt during part of the process, what is the state of the end device? Does it stop? Does it wait? Does it roll back?
If there is any error during this whole state, we've decided to roll back the configurations back.
Okay.
You don't want to leave it in a state where you cannot recover from.
Is that execution done locally? Or does the remote site still have to connect to it? In other words, if I lose connectivity to that branch location, do I expect that to autonomously go, you know what, I lost connectivity, my countdown timer went to 10 minutes, roll myself back? Or is it done by...
Reboot in 15.
Reload in 10, yeah, but... is that...
So there's two things. One is, we've got the local monitoring of at the device level. And I think there's different policies here. Some people would like to wipe out the VM and start over. Others will say just reboot the VM. So there's we have the ability of taking corrective action at the local device automatically, but often we think that's really going to be driven by the central administrator and what they want to do. Yep. So you can set the knobs you want and have it behave the way you want, but we don't say this is what we'll do automatically. On our first build, we had exactly that. We'd keep wiping it out. We never got the thing installed because it's taking too long to install. So we went through our bugs and said, this is a bad idea. Let's not just go into recovery mode, right? Because of timing issues or whatever. But I think a lesson learned there was have the policy available, but let the administrator decide which way they want to take
From the rope.
action.
It's a scenario you want to always make sure you're careful of in there, so you don't leave the system in an unstable or...
So is there any sort of best practice guidance you guys provide out of the gate for this? Or?
We will provide as we get, as the next release comes up. So we'll certainly provide these recommendations on what we are doing and what you can do to choose, whether you want to wipe it out, whether you want to leave it, and things like that. But that will come up.
Because
I know Ryan always wants to wipe out the wireless LAN controller every single time.
in the subsequent phases, we'll also have the backup restore for support, so that before you deploy a new service, maybe you want to back up and then deploy the service. If it works, then that's fine. If it doesn't, then we can restore that.
As I said, there are multiple, now I can think here, there are multiple use cases here. Losing connectivity versus, the process of deployment, it gets errored out. There's a greenfield deployment versus a modification. There are multiple different scenarios, and we need to walk through all of them.
All right.